My girlfriend laughed. You care too much about saving money to ever become someone important. I paid the check and left forever. 10 months later, she watched me arrive as a featured guest at an event her wealthy boyfriend couldn't get into. Madison laughed. You care too much about saving money to ever become someone important. The sound carried. A couple at the next table glanced over. The waiter, halfway through clearing our plates, paused for half a second too long before continuing. I didn't say anything. I didn't defend myself. I didn't ask her to repeat it, hoping I'd misheard. I just sat there, fork still in my hand, looking at the woman I'd been planning a life with for 3 years. The restaurant noise kept going around us. Glasses clinking. Someone's laughter 2 tables down. A song I didn't recognize playing low through the speakers. Madison was still smiling, like she'd said something clever. Like she'd done me a favor. I set my fork down. I waved the waiter over. Check, please. Madison's smile faltered. What? Are you seriously doing this right now? Over a joke? I didn't answer. The waiter brought the check. I paid it. Cash, exact amount. No tip line filled in because I'd already calculated the tip and left it separately, because that's who I was. Careful. Precise. The kind of person who cared about saving money. I stood up. I left. 10 months later, Madison would stand across a packed Manhattan ballroom and watch security open the VIP entrance for me. And the man she left me for wouldn't be allowed inside. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I want to be clear about something before I go further. This wasn't some fling. This wasn't a few months of casual dating that fizzled out over a bad joke at dinner. Madison and I had been together for 3 years. We talked about getting an apartment together in Astoria, somewhere with enough space for the home office I wanted to build out. We'd looked at rings, not seriously, not yet, but seriously enough that I knew her ring size, and she knew I knew it. Her parents had me over for Thanksgiving 2 years running. My mother kept a photo of the two of us on her refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like a lighthouse from a trip we took to Maine. This was supposed to be my future. When I walked out of that restaurant that night, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I wasn't thinking about proving her wrong. I was thinking about how I was going to explain to my mother why the lighthouse magnet photo needed to come down. I didn't realize it then, walking down Lexington Avenue in the cold with my hands shoved in my coat pockets. But that moment, that one sentence, said with a laugh, loud enough for strangers to hear, had just changed the entire direction of my life. I just didn't know it yet. To understand how we got to that restaurant, you have to understand how Madison and I started. Because the version of her that laughed at me that night wasn't the version I fell in love with. Not even close. We met at a friend's birthday party in Bushwick, back when I was 24, and renting a room in an apartment with 3 roommates I barely saw. Madison was 23, working at a marketing firm, living with her sister in Queens. She had this laugh, a real one, back then, that made the whole room feel warmer. Our first date was at a pizza place near Union Square. 2 slices each, a shared can of soda because neither of us wanted to spend $4 on 2 drinks. We sat on the sidewalk because there weren't any tables inside, and we talked for 2 hours about nothing important. Movies. Our families. A trip she wanted to take to Portugal someday. I remember walking her home that night and thinking, I could fall in love with this person. And I did. For the first year, we didn't have money. Neither of us did. We'd walk for miles instead of taking the subway. Not because we couldn't afford the fare, but because walking through the city at night, just talking, felt like its own kind of luxury. We'd cook dinner together in her tiny kitchen. Pasta, mostly, because pasta was cheap and we were both bad cooks and pasta forgives bad cooking. Madison used to tease me, back then, about how careful I was with money. But it wasn't mean. It was almost admiring. You're going to be rich one day, she told me once, lying on the couch with her head in my lap. Not because you make a lot. Because you actually think about what you spend. Most people don't think at all. I believed her. I believed in us. We talked about the future constantly. Not in a scared, desperate way. In a way that felt solid. Like we were building something brick by brick, and neither of us was in a rush because we both knew the building was going to stand for a long time. That's the Madison I need you to remember. Because she's going to disappear soon, and what replaces her is going to be hard to recognize. The first cracks were so small, I didn't even register them as cracks. About 2 years in, Madison started saying things. Little things. The kind of comments you could explain away if you wanted to, and I wanted to. We were getting ready to go to a co-worker's engagement party, and I put on a button-down shirt I'd had for years. Madison looked at it and said, "Don't wear that one. Wear the blue one." I shrugged and changed shirts. No big deal. A few weeks later, we were talking about my job. I worked in operations for a mid-sized logistics company. Decent pay, stable, nothing flashy, and Madison said, almost offhand, "You know, with your skills, you could probably make a lot more somewhere else." It sounded like encouragement. It sounded like someone who believed in me. Then there was the dinner with her college friends, where someone mentioned a guy who'd just gotten promoted to director at some finance firm, and Madison said, "God, must be nice," in a tone I'd never heard from her before. Light, but pointed, like she was saying it to the room, but really saying it to me. "Everyone else is just ahead," she said another time, scrolling through her phone while we sat on the couch. Like, I look at people from college and they're buying houses already. I told her houses in this market were basically impossible for anyone our age unless their parents helped. She just made a small sound, not quite agreement, and kept scrolling. I didn't think much of any of it at the time. People talk. People compare. It's normal. I was wrong about that, but I wouldn't understand how wrong for a long time. Around the 2.5-year mark, Madison's friend Sydney started showing up more often. I'd met Sydney a handful of times before. She and Madison had known each other since high school, but suddenly she was everywhere. Brunches, group chats, weekend plans. Sydney had a thing she did every single time I saw her. She talked about the men she was dating in terms of what they could afford. Not in a crude way, exactly. More like, it was just the framework she used to describe people. "He took me to this place in Tribeca. Like, you have no idea. He has a place in the Hamptons, can you imagine?" I told him I wasn't interested unless he was serious, and he literally bought me a bag the next day. The first time I heard Sydney talk like that, I caught Madison's eye and gave her a look, like, "Can you believe this?" Expecting her to roll her eyes back at me, the way she used to when people were being ridiculous. Instead, Madison was just listening, nodding, almost leaning in. I told myself it was just Sydney being Sydney, and that Madison was too smart to actually absorb any of it. I was wrong about that too. Over the following months, Madison started bringing up restaurants she'd seen on Instagram, places with no prices listed on the menu, which should tell you something. She started following more accounts that were just people showing off bags, trips, watches. She started asking me questions that felt different than before. "Do you ever think about switching jobs? Like, somewhere with more growth? Don't you think it's weird that we still split everything 50-50? Like, shouldn't that change eventually?" I answered honestly every time. I told her I was happy with my job, that it was stable and I was good at it, and there was room to grow if I was patient. I told her splitting things felt fair to me, and that money had never been the thing that defined us. She'd nod. She'd say, "Yeah, totally." But something in her face had started to change. A kind of distance, like she was looking at me from slightly further away each time. Then came the dinner with her work friends. We were at a group dinner, 6 or 7 people, a noisy Italian place in the East Village, and someone asked what I did for a living. I told them, briefly, the way I always did. Operations, logistics, nothing exciting, but I liked it. Madison laughed. Not a mean laugh, not exactly. But she said, to the table, "He's basically a professional spreadsheet person," and everyone chuckled, and I chuckled too because what else do you do? But under the table, my stomach had dropped a little. Because it wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. Like she was performing distance from me for an audience. I let it go. I always let it go. It was around this time that Logan's name started coming up. The first time, it was nothing. Madison mentioned that her company had done some kind of cross-promotional event with another firm, and one of the guys there, Logan something, had been really impressive. Confident. Charismatic. He'd apparently bought a round of drinks for the whole table without blinking. "He sounds like a tool," I said, half joking. "No, he was actually really nice," Madison said. "Just, like, successful, you know? It's refreshing." Refreshing. Compared to what? I remember thinking. But I didn't ask. A few weeks later, Logan's name came up again. Madison had run into him at some networking thing. She'd started going to more of those, on her own, which was new. And apparently he'd remembered her name, which she mentioned like it was significant. Then again, and again. Each time, it was small. A passing comment. Oh, Logan was there too. Logan said something funny about that. Logan's actually starting his own thing. Can you believe that? I noticed. Of course I noticed. But I told myself the obvious thing, that Madison talked about a lot of people, that this was just one more name in a long list of work acquaintances, that being jealous or suspicious over a name mentioned in passing would make me the kind of paranoid boyfriend I never wanted to be. Looking back, I think some part of me did notice the pattern. I think some part of me filed it away, quietly, the way you notice a crack in a ceiling and tell yourself you'll deal with it later. I never dealt with it. Not until it was way too late to matter. The last 6 months of our relationship were quiet in a way that, at the time, I mistook for stability. We texted less. That was the first thing. Where Madison used to send me random updates throughout the day, a funny thing she saw, a song she liked, a photo of her lunch. Those messages slowed to almost nothing. When I texted her, she'd respond, but often hours later, with short replies. LOL, yeah. Haha, same. Okay. I told myself everyone goes through phases like this. Work gets busy. People get tired. It doesn't mean anything. The criticism, though, that increased. It was never one big thing. It was death by 1,000 small comments. The way I dressed. The restaurants I suggested, which she'd started calling fine, in a tone that made it clear they were not fine. The fact that I still used a flip phone-era budgeting app to track every expense, which she used to find endearing and now found. In her words, kind of sad, honestly. We had less affection too. Less of the casual stuff, the hand on the back, the kiss on the way out the door, the late-night conversations that used to stretch for hours. Now, when we were together, there was often a TV on, or her phone out, or some kind of buffer between us. And Madison had started measuring people. That's the only way I can describe it. Every person she talked about got sorted, instantly, by what they had, what they made, what they drove, where they lived. It wasn't even malicious. It was just how she processed people now, like a reflex she couldn't turn off. I still believed we could recover. I genuinely did. I thought maybe we were just in a rough patch, the kind every long relationship hits, and that if I was patient, things would go back to how they used to be. Then came the night that should have been the warning that ended everything, 3 months before it actually did. We were lying in bed, not talking, both on our phones, when Madison said, out of nowhere, "You know you have potential, right?" I looked over at her, surprised. "Thanks. I think." She didn't look up from her phone. "But potential isn't success," she said. She said it so casually, like she was commenting on the weather, like it wasn't the cruelest thing anyone had ever said to me in bed at 11 at night. I didn't respond. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling something in my chest go cold and quiet. I should have left that night. I know that now. I didn't. I stayed 3 more months. I kept hoping. I kept believing that the woman from the pizza place on Union Square was still in there somewhere, buried under whatever Sydney and Logan and Instagram had built on top of her. She wasn't. Or if she was, she'd stopped trying to dig herself out. The breaking point came on a Friday night, at a restaurant Madison had picked. Someplace new, in Tribeca, the kind of place with a menu that didn't list prices for the wine. I remember the night felt off from the start. Madison had been distracted the whole week. Short replies, canceled plans, that distant look she'd been wearing more and more often. When she suggested this dinner, I actually felt hopeful. I thought maybe she wanted to talk. Maybe this was the night we'd finally address whatever had been growing between us. We sat down. We ordered. The conversation was stiff, small talk about her work, about a show we'd both half-watched, about nothing. Then Madison brought up a couple we knew vaguely, friends of friends, who'd just bought a place in Hoboken. "Must be nice," she said, the same way she'd said it before, months ago, about the guy with the promotion. "His parents probably helped, though?" "Has to be." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe they just saved for a long time." Madison gave a short laugh. "Sure. On what salary?" I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the one I'd gotten used to ignoring. But this time, something in me didn't want to ignore it. Something in me wanted to push back, just a little. "We've saved a lot too," I said. "We could probably do something similar in a few years, if we kept." "A few years," Madison repeated, and there was an edge in her voice now. "Right. A few years of you putting $20 into a savings account every week and calling it a plan." "That's not what I do," I said, keeping my voice level. "You know that's not what I do." "I know you care about it a lot," she said. "Like, a lot. More than almost anything else. I care about our future." And that's when she laughed. It wasn't a big laugh. It wasn't cruel in volume. It was almost worse because of how small it was, how easy it came to her. Like this was a thought she'd been carrying around for a while and finally just let slip out. Comfortable, amused. "You care too much about saving money," she said, "to ever become someone important." The restaurant kept going around us. A couple at the next table glanced over. The waiter paused. I didn't say anything. I looked at her. Really looked at her. And for the first time in 3 years, I didn't see anyone I recognized. I saw someone who had been quietly building a case against me for months, maybe longer, and had just delivered the verdict out loud, in public, with a laugh, like it cost her nothing. This wasn't advice. It never had been. It was contempt, dressed up as honesty, and she'd been carrying it for a long time. I didn't argue. I didn't ask her what she meant. I didn't give her the fight she might have been expecting, or the tears, or the desperate questions. I waved the waiter over. Check, please. What? Are you seriously doing this right now? Over a joke? I paid. I stood up. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair, slow and unhurried, like a man finishing a task rather than fleeing a scene. I'll have someone pick up my things from the apartment this week, I said. Calm. Quiet. Wait, what? You're being insane right now. I walked out. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I'd already seen everything I needed to see. The days after the breakup were strange. Not dramatic, strange. I felt less like someone in mourning and more like someone who'd just set down a weight he didn't realize he'd been carrying. Austin, my closest friend since college, came over the second night with a six-pack and a pizza, the same kind we used to get when we were broke 22-year-olds. We didn't talk much at first. He just sat with me. Then, somewhere around the third beer, Austin said, I have to tell you something, and you're probably not going to want to hear it. Okay. Madison's been talking about Logan for months. Like, a lot. Sydney told my girlfriend that Madison's basically been, I don't know, building something with this guy. For a while. I didn't react the way Austin maybe expected. I just nodded slowly. How long is a while? I asked. Austin hesitated. Sydney said at least 4 months. Maybe longer. For months. That lined up almost exactly with when the potential isn't success comment happened. With when the texting dried up. With when Madison started going to networking events alone. It wasn't an affair, exactly. Or at least, I never found proof of anything physical happening before we broke up. But emotionally, Madison had checked out of our relationship months before that dinner. She'd been building an exit, slowly, quietly, while I kept hoping things would go back to how they used to be. The thing that hit me hardest wasn't even the timeline. It was realizing that every potential isn't success comment, every must be nice, every small dig about money, all of it had been Madison comparing me to Logan. Out loud, without saying his name. I'd been losing a competition I didn't even know I was in. Within 3 weeks of our breakup, Madison was posting photos with Logan. Restaurants. A weekend trip somewhere with a view of mountains I didn't recognize. Sydney commenting finally. Under one of them, like this had been a long time coming. Which, I now understood, it had. I won't pretend it didn't hurt. It did. For a while. It hurt in that specific way where you keep replaying moments, trying to figure out which ones were real and which ones were just waiting. But somewhere in there, the hurt started turning into something else. Not anger exactly. More like clarity. I kept thinking about that line. You care too much about saving money to ever become someone important. And for the first time, instead of feeling ashamed of it, I felt something different. I felt like she'd just told me exactly what to do. I'm not going to pretend the next several months were some kind of movie montage where everything clicked into place overnight. That's not how it works, and frankly, anyone who tells you it works that way is selling you something. What actually happened was slower and less glamorous, and honestly took a lot longer than I wanted it to. The first thing I did was the most boring thing imaginable. I sat down and actually looked at where my career could go, instead of just being comfortable where it was. I'd been good at my job for years, operations, logistics, the kind of work that keeps companies running but rarely gets celebrated. I started asking myself a question I'd never really asked before. What's the version of this that doesn't max out at stable? I started taking on projects nobody else wanted. The unglamorous ones, process audits, vendor renegotiations, the kind of work that's tedious but where you can actually move numbers in a noticeable way. I worked late some nights, not because anyone asked me to, but because I wanted to understand the parts of the business that were usually invisible to someone at my level. I also started saving differently. Not just putting money away, that part I'd always done, but I started thinking about it strategically. I took a course, on my own time, about supply chain consulting, an area adjacent to what I already did, but with a path towards something bigger. I paid for it out of the savings Madison used to mock. Around month 4, one of the projects I'd taken on, a vendor consolidation that ended up saving my company a significant chunk of money annually, got noticed. Not by my direct manager. By someone 2 levels up, someone I'd never even spoken to directly before. He asked to meet with me. That meeting led to another project, slightly bigger, slightly more visible. It wasn't fast. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real, and it was mine, and nobody had handed it to me. Somewhere around this time, I met Qley. She wasn't part of any grand plan. She worked at a company my firm partnered with on one of the consolidation projects, and we ended up on a few calls together, then a few in-person meetings. She was sharp, the kind of sharp where she'd ask one question in a meeting that made everyone else realize they'd missed something obvious. We didn't start as anything romantic. Honestly, for a long time, we were just two people who respected each other's work. She'd send me articles relevant to projects we were both on. I'd return the favor. We grabbed coffee a few times to talk through problems, and somewhere in there, those coffees started lasting longer than they needed to. I wasn't in a rush. After Madison, I think some part of me had learned that rushing into things, performing a relationship instead of building one, was exactly the kind of thing that hollows people out. So Qley and I just existed near each other for a while. Friendship first. Whatever came after that could come after that. By month 7, I'd been promoted. Not to some glamorous title, but to a role with real responsibility, better pay, and a level of respect from people whose respect I actually valued. I started attending industry events, the kind I used to avoid because they felt like a waste of an evening. Turns out they weren't a waste. Turns out a lot of opportunity lives in rooms most people don't bother walking into. That's where I met Colton. Around month 8, things in Madison's world started to crack, though I didn't learn about most of it until later and only in pieces. The first piece came from Austin again, who still occasionally got updates through the Sydney grapevine, whether he wanted them or not. So, Austin said one night, over drinks at a bar near my new office, apparently Logan's business isn't quite what everyone thought. What do you mean? I mean, Sydney let something slip. Apparently a lot of the stuff Logan's been showing off, not all of it's his. Some of it's, like, borrowed, or financed in ways that are, let's say, not stable. I didn't feel triumphant hearing this. Mostly, I just felt a kind of distant recognition, like watching weather roll in over a city you used to live in. How's Madison handling that? I asked. Austin shrugged. No idea. Sydney got weird when she realized she'd said too much. Changed the subject fast. I didn't think much more about it at the time. I had my own things going on. Work was busier than ever. Qley and I had started seeing each other more intentionally, and honestly, Madison's world had started to feel like something that belonged to a different person's life. My life, 10 months earlier. Then, near the end of month 9, I got a call from Tanner. Tanner ran a mid-sized industry event, the kind that brought together people from logistics, supply chain consulting, and a handful of adjacent finance and operations firms for a night of panels, networking, and apparently, a fairly notable open bar. I'd met Tanner briefly at one of the events I'd started attending, through Colton, and we'd had a good conversation about some of the consolidation work I'd been doing. We're putting together a panel for the spring event, Tanner said. Operational efficiency, cost structuring, that kind of thing. Your name came up more than once. We'd love to have you as a featured speaker. VIP access, full credentials, the works. I stood there for a second, in my apartment, holding my phone, and felt something settle into place. I'd be honored, I said. After I hung up, I sat down on my couch and just breathed for a minute. 10 months ago, I'd walked out of a restaurant with nothing but a paid check and a quiet exit. And now someone was calling me to ask if I'd be a featured guest at an event that, I happened to know, a certain wealthy entrepreneur had been trying to get into for over a year. I didn't know yet that Madison would be there too. Not at first. But when Colton mentioned, almost in passing, that the event was the same one Logan had been trying to get tickets to for ages, I started putting things together. I didn't plan a confrontation. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't building towards some big reveal, some moment of theater. I was just going to go do my job, speak on a panel, represent the work I'd done. But I won't pretend some part of me didn't wonder what it would be like if Madison was in that room. The night of the event, the ballroom was already half full by the time I arrived through the side entrance, the one reserved for speakers and VIP guests. It was a beautiful space. High ceilings, soft gold lighting, round tables set with more care than most weddings I'd been to. A stage at the far end with screens on either side, cycling through sponsor logos and speaker names. My name was on one of those screens. I felt Kayla's hand brush mine as we walked in together. She squeezed it once, just briefly. Not a big gesture, just a quiet, "I'm here," and then let go so I could go meet Tanner, who was waiting near the stage with a credential lanyard for me. "You're up second," Tanner said, clipping the lanyard around my neck himself, like he was personally proud of it. "Colton's going to do the intro. You ready?" "Ready," I said. I had maybe 20 minutes before the panel started, so I walked the floor a little, shaking hands, talking briefly with people I recognized from other events, getting a feel for the room. That's when I saw her. Madison was near the main entrance, the general admission line, not the VIP one, wearing a dress I didn't recognize, looking around the room with the kind of expression people have when they're trying to seem like they belong somewhere they're not entirely sure they belong. She hadn't seen me yet. And then I saw Logan. He was at the main entrance too, except he wasn't moving past it. He was talking, more like arguing, in that polite but tense way people argue in public, with one of the security staff at the velvet rope that separated general admission from the floor. I was too far to hear exactly what was being said, but I could read it well enough. Logan gestured at his phone, like he was showing a confirmation email. The security guard shook his head, gestured toward a different line, the will call table, maybe, or just toward the exit. Logan wasn't on the list. Or if he was, it wasn't the list that mattered. I didn't go over there. I didn't need to. I just watched, for a moment, from a comfortable distance, as the man Madison had chosen, the successful, refreshing, watch-buying, drink-buying symbol of everything she decided I wasn't, stood at a velvet rope, getting turned away from a room I'd just walked into without breaking stride. Then I turned and walked toward the stage, because Tanner was waving me over, and because I had a panel to do. The panel went well. Better than well. Honestly, Colton's introduction was generous, the moderator's questions were sharp, and I found myself talking about the consolidation work with an ease I wouldn't have had 10 months earlier. Not because the work was easier, because I finally believed I belonged in the conversation. Partway through, I glanced toward the crowd, not looking for anyone in particular, just doing the things speakers do, scanning the room. That's when I saw Madison. She was standing near the back, near one of the screens that had cycled, at some point, to a slide with my name and a short bio. She was looking at the screen, then at the stage, then back at the screen. She wasn't moving. She was just staring. The way you stare at something that doesn't fit into the picture you'd built of the world. I didn't react. I kept talking, answering the moderator's next question, and when I glanced back a minute later, Madison was still there, except now her arms were crossed, and her expression had shifted into something I recognized. The same look she used to get when something didn't go the way she'd planned, and she was trying to figure out how to feel about it before deciding how to act. The panel wrapped about 20 minutes later to solid applause. I shook hands with the moderator, with Colton, with a few people who came up afterward to exchange cards. Kayla found her way back to me, smiling, and said something about how proud she was, not in a performative way, just simply, like it was a fact she was glad to state out loud. I was talking with Colton near the edge of the stage when I saw Madison approaching. She walked slowly, carefully, like she wasn't entirely sure this was something she wanted to do, but had decided to do it anyway because the alternative, leaving without saying anything, felt worse. "Hey," she said, when she got close enough. Her voice was smaller than I remembered. "Hey," I said. Even. Not cold, not warm. Just even. Colton, with the kind of social instinct people develop after years of these events, excused himself with a quiet, "I'll let you two catch up," and stepped away. Madison glanced around, at the stage, at the screens, at Kayla standing a few feet away, and then back at me. "I didn't know you were going to be here," she said. I didn't know you did this kind of thing now. The panel," and she stopped. "Started again. I saw your name on the screen, and I thought it was, like, a coincidence. Same name. But then you walked out, and it was." "It's me," I said. "Yeah." She nodded, looking down for a second. "Yeah, I figured that out." There was a pause. The kind of pause that, 10 months ago, I would have rushed to fill, with reassurance, with small talk, with anything to make the silence less uncomfortable for her. I didn't fill it this time. I didn't think. Madison started, and then stopped again, like the sentence didn't have an ending she was willing to say out loud. I knew what she didn't think. I didn't need her to finish it. "I know," I said. That was it. 2 words. Not cruel. Not a speech. Not the moment where I listed everything she'd said to me over the last year of our relationship, or asked her how Logan was doing at the velvet rope, or said anything at all about what I'd seen at the entrance 20 minutes earlier. I just said, "I know," and let it sit there. Madison's eyes were a little glassy. She nodded, slowly, like she understood that this conversation, whatever she'd hoped it might become, had already reached its natural end. "It's good to see you doing well," she said, quieter now. "Thanks," I said. "Take care, Madison." And I turned and walked back toward Qley and Colton and didn't look back to see what Madison did next. I didn't need to know. It wasn't my business anymore. The rest of the evening passed easily. Colton introduced me to a handful of people who were interested in the consolidation framework I talked about on the panel. 2 of them mentioned wanting to set up calls the following week. Tanner thanked me again for being part of the event and mentioned, casually, that they'd love to have me back for a larger panel in the fall. Qley and I got a quiet table near the edge of the room for a while, away from the noise, and just talked about the event, about work, about a trip she'd been wanting to take that I realized, somewhere in the conversation, I wanted to take with her. At one point, near the end of the night, I glanced toward the entrance again. Madison was near the doors, not inside the velvet rope, not part of the room she'd come hoping to be part of. She was standing near the general admission exit, alone, looking back across the room one more time. I don't know what she was looking at exactly. Maybe the stage. Maybe the screens. Maybe just the room itself. All of it. The kind of room she'd spent the last year of our relationship measuring people by their ability to get into. I didn't feel anger when I saw her there. I didn't feel triumph, either, not really. Mostly I just felt distance. The kind of distance you feel looking at an old photograph of yourself, recognizable, but not really you anymore. I turned back to Qley, who was in the middle of a story about her first networking event ever, where she'd accidentally called her boss's boss by the wrong name for 20 minutes. I laughed. A real laugh. And when I looked toward the entrance again, a few minutes later, Madison was gone. The last thing I saw was the woman who once laughed at my future, standing outside a room she could never enter.